This was one of the hardest things to prepare for because there are so many different statistics on this, and all of them are pretty much different. And I found the reason for that is because not all abortions are reported. And I'm not going to go through what an abortion is. If you want to see this horrific and barbaric thing, there's certainly you can look it up for yourself. So I'm not going to go through all that, and I'm not going to go through all the news articles and on this issue. For I could stand here all night just reading them. But as you know, the Supreme Court is taking up this issue of the Louisiana law that requires that doctors performing abortions have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. And that they should have a ruling on this by early next year. But I want to say this at the outset. We can have as many meetings as we want to. Meetings are good and they're informative, and we should have them. And we can hold as many rallies as we want to, and that's good. It's good to get motivated and to be active. And we can sign all the petitions we want to. But we will not make one difference unless Christ is our focus. And unless there is a fear of God. And that fear of God, it must start in the house of God. What we must realize in the fight, that our focus must not be on what we are fighting against, but our focus must be on who is fighting for us. In other words, our focus must be on Christ alone, and then He will give us the tools needed for the battle. And I'm going to get to this issue, but I want to say this, and you can disagree or not, but abortion is the result of a decaying church. Abortion is the result of a decaying church. If the church was influencing and impacting the culture, this issue would not be going to the Supreme Court. Agree or disagree? But because if you look at the disciples, they were never on the defense. They absolutely changed the world under the headship of Jesus Christ. It was always on the offense and never backed up against the wall and waiting on the enemy to do something so they could counter-react what the enemy's done. No, they went on the offense. But I want to begin tonight with a true story. Dr. Agnew was a professor at the UCLA Medical School, and he gave his students a question. And he said, what would you recommend in this situation? The father has syphilis. The mother has tuberculosis. They've already had 4 children. One of the kids is blind. The second child died. The third child is deaf. The fourth child has TB. Now the mother is pregnant with her 5th child. The parents are willing to have an abortion if you, the doctor, decide that they should. So what do you think they should do? And the majority of these medical students voted that she should have an abortion. Then Dr. Agnew said, "Congratulations, class. You have just murdered one of the greatest musical composers of all time." That was Beethoven. That was the circumstances of his home. So this nation was built on a moral and spiritual foundation. And that foundation today, as you and I can see, is crumbling. If the restoring of our moral values do not begin now, then it may never begin. And that restoring begins by getting back to the Bible. Morality is not determined by the vote of the people, nor is it determined by the opinions of the people. But morality is determined by the Word of God. The Bible says in Romans chapter 3, verse 20, it says, "By the law is the knowledge of sin." And so with this understanding that by the law is the knowledge of sin, with this understanding, now we can begin to speak on this issue. This nation, which certainly prides itself on its humanitarianism, is in a murderous cycle of violence that makes the Nazi Holocaust look mild by comparison. Nearly 1 million babies are aborted a year in America. Every third baby conceived now is being murdered. Among married women, abortions now exceed births. And more babies are killed than are born. And some would tell us that there is an abortion about every 15 seconds. And so pregnancy then is seen by Planned Parenthood as a sexually transmitted disease that needs to be cured through abortion. Our nation and other nations in the world are frankly wiping out an entire generation of human beings in this mass infanticide. It is estimated that perhaps as many as 75 million babies will be murdered this year around the world. 75 million. That's probably conservative. More than all the deaths and all the wars and all the history of the world. This is the stupidity of humanism. 15-year-olds can get abortions without parental knowledge or consent. In fact, the law wants to say that parents are the enemy of the freedom of the child. Even the consent of a spouse is unconstitutional. Dead fetuses are used in an industry of business and experimentation. The Journal of Clinical Pathology indicates that fetal organs have been grafted into mice and rats to see how long they live. There's other frightening experiments that I won't get into. The U.S. government funded experiments on live aborted babies, and some are thrown away. A doctor in New York City wrote on any Monday, you can see 70 garbage bags with fetal material in them along the sidewalks of abortion clinics in New York City. And so you're dealing with a very, very widespread problem. And it is now possible to do to a retarded infant what would be impossible to do to a dog or a cat. Yet on the other side of this, a wounded eagle, American eagle, was found, and it was rushed to emergency treatment. However, it died, and so they offered a $5,000 reward for the arrest of whoever injured it. It's illegal to catch and keep a pregnant lobster in Maine. $1,000 fine. There's an anti-cruelty law that makes it illegal to award a goldfish as a prize. But why? And this is what they said. This is why. To protect the tendency to dull humanitarian feelings and corrupt the morals of those who abuse them. The same people who want to save the goldfish are leading the parade, usually to kill the babies. And this, of course, has developed into a multi-billion, that's with a B, a billion-dollar industry. And in terms of business, many people make their money on this. And in other countries in the world, people are still reeling from the impact of this thing called abortion. And I'll touch on just one, and that is Japan. Japan has been very aggressive in the abortion field for a number of years. And in Japan, there is severe trauma on the part of the Japanese women because there have been millions and millions of abortions that have occurred there. And over the last, say, 40 years in Japan, there have been an excess of 50 million abortions that are known. And the women have been traumatized by these abortions in terms of their own emotional life. And so the Buddhists have set up temples for the expressed purpose of dealing with this issue of abortion. And these are temples which memorialize what are called water babies. This is a term for an aborted child, a water baby, those who perish by abortion. And so in order to secure peace for their departed souls, these women come to these places and they are now aware of the fact in their own conscience, at least they assume this to be true without any biblical revelation. And they assume that these little babies have a soul, these aborted babies have a soul, and so they've got to do something for the departed soul. And so the Buddhists in their religion have set up temples where the departed souls of water babies can be attended to by the mothers. And so for somewhere between $340 and $640, a grieving mother can purchase a small stone Buddha, and somehow purchasing the small stone not only feeds the business enterprise, but relieves some of the anxiety, and apparently it does something for the departed soul of the baby. You can look this on the internet in Japan, and it's just people walk by and take pictures, and it's sad. And in one temple alone, tens of thousands of these have been sold. The grounds have become a commercial attraction where visitors pay to come and take pictures of women who are agonizing over their departed baby. Priests will offer prayers at that place for these babies at $120 per baby and $40 for each additional baby that you had aborted. And so that's just one illustration, but that's sad to see all those little stones set up where they've aborted all these babies. But here in America, we just throw them in a trash bag in the dumpster. So we've got to be better than the other countries, so we just take it one step further. But there's a statistic that says somewhere between 400 and 800% of suicide rates increase in women who have had abortions. Depression, withdrawal, guilt, shame, drug, alcohol dependency, serious emotion, trauma, all of these come from abortions. It says 6 to 7 times more women die each year also from legal than illegal abortions. The risk of pregnancy outside the womb, which threatens the mother's life, is doubled for women who have had one abortion and quadrupled where there have been two or more. Miscarriages are almost twice as common for women who have had an abortion. A study of 26,000 births indicated a more than threefold increase in the number of stillborn babies and deaths of newborns among mothers who have had an abortion. Since about 2 or 3 women per 100 need a blood transfusion, there is an increased risk of exposure to hepatitis and AIDS. And bleeding is more common in subsequent wanted pregnancies. Many researchers have observed subsequent premature births and low birth rates. I'm going to get to the history of abortion in a moment. And then you look at the emotional effect women have having prior emotional and mental problems before the abortion often becomes worse. And having an abortion produce such problems in women who have previously had none. And women who have had an abortion are more likely to experience guilt and depression and be suicidal. However, there's a claim that a woman will commit suicide if she is denied an abortion. And that's what they say. But it's highly unlikely because suicide is almost non-existent among pregnant women. And so, after all that, and so the question then comes, how did this ever get started? Who started all this? Well, you have to go back. I mean, if we want to know where it all started, we have to see that it started certainly in the mind of Satan. According to John chapter 8, verse 44, it says he is a murderer. And so it started from the same kind of fallen attitude that made Cain kill Abel. Cain was a murderer. And that's the expression of fallenness. And you can go way back and you'll find that there have been efforts on the part of Satan to murder babies in the times of Moses and in the times of Jesus. And he was successful. And as you know, in the time of Jesus, in massacring babies under the age of 2 in order to try to eliminate the Messiah. And so, looking back, say, the ancient time of Judaism, find abortions practiced among pagans. And so then you come to the New Testament time, and there was also pagans who engaged in abortion. Plato and Aristotle both recommended family growth, limitation through abortion. And abortion was used even in New Testament times among pagans to conceal illicit sex. So it isn't new. And we must stand against it. And so here we are living in a time when this abortion movement has become a massive industry, has become a reflection of our culture. And if you look back a little bit and begin to see what the pieces were that sort of came together to build the platform on which this whole thing stands. And so if you go back to the sexual revolution, which basically said we want to be free to express ourselves sexually. And you go back to the early 60s and everybody's got to be engaged in all this free love and all the hippies and all that whole thing. But the sexual revolution spawned abortion as an industry because it basically said if we have to be free to express ourselves sexually, and we don't really need to be dealing with the consequences. In fact, they would go as far to say this: if we're going to be free, we women certainly can't be victimized by men. Men can jump in and out of bed with anybody they want all day long and walk away, and there aren't any consequences to them. But what happens to us is we get pregnant. And so their freedom has no consequence. Their freedom has no detrimental results. But our freedom as women does. So in order for us to be really free, you've got to eliminate the consequence. The major consequence of free love, and that is you've got to be able to eliminate pregnancy. Otherwise, we become victimized by men, and we don't want to be victimized by men. This is what they say. So the sexual revolution with its free love really set the stage for the massacring of millions of babies who were nothing but an intrusion in the fornications and the adulteries of a wretched, degenerate society. And so the feminist movement took the expression of sexual freedom one step further. And they said this: we not only want to be sexually free without consequence, but we want to be able to put on our blue suit and take our briefcase and go to work every day too. What they say. We want to compete in a man's world as equals, and so if we have babies, then we can't do that. They said women are not equal. They said they're not equal to men unless they are rid of childbearing responsibilities. Betty Friedan, who was the leader of the feminist movement, she said this: women must have abortion as a backup to contraceptive failure. Contraception first, and if that doesn't work, then abortion, because we can't be bothered with children. We've got to go to work and make our way in a man's world. And so you had the sexual revolution combined by this, and so then you had the feminist argument that says if we're going to work in a man's world and be equal to men in every way, we can't be fussing around at home with all these kids. So we've got to eliminate them from our lives. And so all of this fed the building of this platform. It was all material fed into this building project to build a platform upon which the Roe versus Wade legalized abortion verdict that came down in January of 1973. I'm not going to get into the church's role and what they did and all that, because I can't find what the church did. And so at that point, the Supreme Court of the United States excluded unborn children from the protection of the 14th Amendment, which says no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. And so they said unborn children are not persons. Yes, they are. And one English professor said this: the phrase pro-choice means without conscience, without inhibition, or without restraint. And it parades itself under the Jeffersonian banner of liberty, of conscience, and separation of church and state, as a rhetorical gesture perfectly designed to function as a political banner This phrase constitutes the last word, the official formulation of official apostate defiance against the God of Christianity. Then he said, I'm confident that God will answer apocalyptically. I believe abortion is the last official stand of the defiant apostate against God. It says, God, you will not determine who lives or dies, but I will. That is the ultimate apostasy. And that's where we are in our culture. And we've been there by law. I know we've had some things turn around. But the church ignored the issue of when life begins, and so the court ignored the issue of when life begins, which is a medical scientific issue. Even though criminals have been successfully prosecuted for killing unborn children in an attack on a pregnant mother, the child is considered a non-person if its own mother decides to kill it. If a criminal kills it, they're prosecuted. If the mother kills it, it's just a non-person. Upside down world. And as far as I can tell, there is no nation on the face of the earth with a more permissive abortion policy than the United States, with a single exception of China. It's reflective of our immoral, perverted sexual revolution, of the deviation from a God-ordained role for men and women. It is reflective of our selfish, materialistic value system. It is reflective, most of all, of our atheistic ethic hostile to God. And we now have a Holocaust to answer for. And we have a Holocaust which God will judge. Haven't noticed. If you have not noticed, He's already begun judging. So now I'm going to go to the Bible. If you want to turn there, you can. Leviticus chapter 20, 1 through 5. Leviticus 21 through 5. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, any Israelite or any foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Molech is to be put to death. The members of the community are to stone him. I myself will set my face against him and will cut him off from his people. For by sacrificing his children to Molech, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. If the members of the community close their eyes when that man sacrifices one of his children to Molech, and if they fail to put him to death, I myself will set my face against him and his family, and will cut them off from their people together with all who follow him in prostituting themselves to Molech. And in a couple chapters earlier, in chapter 18, it makes it explicitly clear that God is talking about child sacrifice. The heathen ritual of offering living babies as burnt offerings to pagan gods. And after reading this passage, doesn't it appear that God has much patience for this barbaric practice. Notice that God is not just commanding Israel to not sacrifice their own children, but he also expects them to intervene for the children of the strangers among them. He expects them to intervene. And it says, if God's people close their eyes and fail to drive child sacrifice from their midst, God will set his face against them. In Jeremiah chapter 19, a statement that's maybe even more shocking. It says, because the people have forsaken me and profaned this place by making offerings in it to other gods, whom neither they nor their fathers nor the kings of Judah have known, and because they have filled this place with the blood of innocents, and have built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal, which I did not command nor decree, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when this place shall no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. God, through the prophet Jeremiah, tells us that the act of child sacrifice is so wicked that it never even entered his mind that his people could do something so despicable. This is such a stunning statement to come from the mouth of a sovereign and all-knowing God. Said, nor did it come into my mind that my people would burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal. The domestication of abortion has made it tragically commonplace, so much so that we seem to have lost our ability to be outraged by it. How is it that even we who oppose abortion are not more overwhelmed by the fact that it is legal in the United States of America? Tear apart tiny bodies of the helpless unborn children. The Guttmacher Institute, which tracks abortion data, it tells us that 70% of aborting women identify themselves as Catholic or Protestant. Did you hear what I said? 70% of aborting women identify themselves as Catholic or Protestant. That sink in. Eliminating abortion in the world, listen to me, eliminating abortion in the world begins with eliminating abortion in the church. Pastors must get over the fear of offending those in their congregation who have already had abortions, so that they can help spare those who still have not. And yes, there is forgiveness for those who've had an abortion. And youth pastors, you must come to terms with the fact that in many ways Christian teens are even more vulnerable to abortion than their unsaved peers. They must be exposed to the truth. Cowardice of some pastors when it comes to preaching against abortion is appalling. Many today treat the dismemberment of unborn humans as an untouchable issue because they don't want to get into politics. Some have bought into the notion that they can be personally pro-life, but publicly pro-choice or non-committal. The issue of abortion in our land is immoral and it's unjust. That should be declared from tens of thousands of pulpits in America today. We must remember that there is a balance in the Christian life. And we are all prone to fall off one side or the other. The Bible should keep us from falling off. The world must know that abortion is the act of violence that kills a baby. And the world must know that there is only one name under heaven given to men by which we are saved. We are not sometimes working to end abortion and sometimes working to spread the gospel, but we are always working for the magnification of the glory of God. We must not lose sight of the bigger evangelicalistic picture, but neither can we ignore the pious indifference of our unborn neighbors. The only hope that we have for maintaining this balance is to consistently live under the power and the influence of the Holy Spirit. Mary Gale approached me about a month ago and asked if I maybe could speak on this topic. Now, I didn't know if I could, but it's certainly what God wanted. Found that very clear. And, you know, we've had some victories, but I will tell you this fight is far from over. We, for some reason, the church gets faced with something, and we have a victory, then all of a sudden we sit down while Planned Parenthood has already bought another building in another state without any cry from anyone. I mean, the enemy's working while the church is still celebrating their last victory. I mean, our job is never done. We must always be active and seeking out the truth and certainly in prayer and like our we should certainly be speaking to those in Congress and Senate and still have meetings and rallies and all that stuff, but we must not forget that God is our priority. If we just seek God, He will give us the wisdom and guidance and direction in which way to go. Many times we don't engage because it was because we didn't know what to do or we didn't know the circumstance. Well, now everybody's informed about, you know, in the political system, you know, since Trump came in, everybody seems to be more informed than they were 4 years ago. So we know we're informed. Well, then it was, well, now it's time to get engaged. Well, or, you know, and so everybody started getting engaged, you know, here and there. And so now it's, where do we go from here? Like we know we're supposed to be engaged, but what's the next step that we need to be doing so that we're not just marching around the same wall for years and the same battle for years and never having the victory. So be in prayer about what can you be doing on this issue of abortion. And there's other issues out there, but what can you be doing to get engaged? And not just be doing something just to be doing it, but what would God have you to do? Where would He have you to go? And who would He have you to speak to? And you never know what doors might be open for you if you would just be obedient to God and willing to work and willing to make a sacrifice. With that said, Scott, would you close us in prayer?